Breaking today, the corrupt mainstream media and royal rota are spinning Prince Harry's dud flop meeting with King Charles to try and clear the way for Meghan Markle's return. It comes as the duplicitous Duke, desperately trying to win over Brits, has flown to Ukraine again, which he thinks will garner him even more positive headlines. His spokespeople have even released a quote on his behalf, talking about how much he loved his time in the United Kingdom. Does he think we're stupid? Does he think we've forgotten his 6 years of digs? The fact that in the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary, actually, they dismissed most Brits as racist Brexiteers. But of course, this charm offensive is almost quite fun to watch because it's so desperate. And we saw that when Harry gave his final speech in the United Kingdom, having just met King Charles. And again, this sort of weirdly almost threatening blokey banter was back. Watch.
So, the big story that's been spun by the mainstream media is this so-called warm reunion between Prince Harry and King Charles. But if you scratch beneath the glossy headlines, what actually happened was far less touching and far more political. Harry jetted back into the UK for what was billed as a private catch-up with his father. The press framed it as reconciliation, a step toward healing old wounds, maybe even a chance for Meghan to re-enter the royal fold.
Big news, Outspoken is now available as a podcast too. So please do subscribe wherever you get yours, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and make sure you rate and review. I'll take 5 stars, if you may.
Surely. This is what I'm talking about, you see. You've been up here too long. I think this whole thing's been delayed slightly, so at this point you're probably hammered, which was part of the plan all along. Stuck up here at the top of the gherkin.
Am I the only one who really hates the way he gives speeches? I'm just so bored of this. But look, there is some serious reporting out of Shooter Scoop, and you know here on Outspoken we have been very across this, although we have tried to do this in a sensitive manner. The real reason behind the meeting is because Charles is just, how do I put this, getting increasingly concerned about his ongoing battle with incurable cancer. So here's the reporting from Rob Shooter, who writes, Prince Harry's surprise tea with King Charles wasn't just about family forgiveness. It was about preparing for the worst. The king's health is far worse than the palace lets on, whispers one royal insider. That's why Harry was summoned. This isn't about reconciliation. It's about succession. Queen Elizabeth quietly battled cancer in her final years, keeping it secret even from close family. But Charles took the opposite approach, announcing his diagnosis in February 2024 after prostate surgery revealed something more serious. It was a mistake, sighs another palace source. Once people know a monarch is dying, the power starts shifting, and that's already happening. Bottom line, Harry's reunion with Charles wasn't a warm and fuzzy family moment. It was a grim reminder that Britain's king may not have much time left. And of course, let me just repeat the details that we know about the visit. Harry was forced to go through the public entrance. According to Lady Colin Campbell here on Outspoken yesterday, he spent less than half an hour, she believes 25 minutes, directly with the monarch. They were never in the room on their own. So, to PR expert, royal commentator, and YouTuber Lauren Lunn Farrow. Lauren, look, there's a lot the media doesn't seem to want to say about this meeting because they are so desperate to try and rehabilitate Prince Harry at the moment. But in all seriousness, how can they try and say that this was a positive thing, that this was a good thing? I mean, Charles hasn't seen his son in 18 months and he spent less than half an hour with him. Clearly, this is about the health. Clearly, this is about King Charles desperately trying to find a way to see the 2 grandchildren, which we'll come to in just a moment. But what's your overall view on why the mainstream media this week continue to try and push what I think is just a dead duck, the idea that Harry is some sort of beloved son who the British public want to return?
But let's be real. The meeting was short, awkward, and anything but cozy. Reports suggest Harry spent about 25 minutes with the king, wasn't allowed one-on-one time. and had to use a public entrant at Clarence's house, a subtle but clear snub. And yet, the royal reporters rushed to tell us this was a wonderful step forward. Why? Well, that's $1 million question.
Because the mainstream media, they exist to make money. They are a for-profit corporation. So they are so heavily reliant on the royal family for content and for news. And do you remember, and this has been going on for a long time with Charles and Harry back in cahoots, I believe, because on the 11th of July, we had Charles's aides and Harry's aides meeting at the ROSL club. And I came on to Outspoken and I told your viewers that this was set up and it was leaked because it was on private property. So we know this has been going on for much, much longer than is being let on. And I just feel it's so disingenuous that people are not being given the truth from the mainstream media. This is performative. And I think Harry coming back over, the arrogance is unbelievable. We all have eyes, we have ears, and we have the internet. We are able to see and remind ourselves exactly how he has behaved and exactly what he has done. The reason the mainstream press will not be truthful about this is because their business model, if you take politicians and you take the royals out of the mainstream business model, there is very little news that would sell. So they are towing the line. I believe King Charles has made a call at the very, very top of the media hierarchy. And we know that 90% of the media is owned by 3 corporations in the UK. And I believe they are on side to turn the narrative on Harry at the request of King Charles, because King Charles's health is in a terrible way, and there is no other way that mainstream media would consider writing favorably about Harry. But what really gets my goat is in between this is the great British public that are wondering what on earth is going on. And they are ultimately being gaslit. They have been fed and really riled up by the mainstream media. And now all of a sudden it seems to have, totally been forgotten everything Harry's done.
Indeed. And my goodness, they think we're stupid. And the great thing is, I think now the mainstream media are losing the power to set this narrative, but they are trying. I mean, this was the spokesperson quote from Harry. So we know this came from Harry direct, and Matt Wilkinson, the royal editor of The Sun, sort of dutifully posted it on X. And the spokesman wrote, he's obviously loved being back in the UK, catching up with old friends, colleagues, and just generally being able to support the incredible work of the causes that mean so much to him. And it's like, honestly, we know you hate us. You have spent the past 6 years doing down our country. You know that you now need proximity to the royal family to try and turn things around and make money back in Montecito. We're not going to be so stupid. But the Royal News Network responded to that post, Lauren. And I'm interested to know what you think about this. They wrote, just curious, what was the point of Megxit and why all the vitriol towards the UK and his family over the years? He's basically back to square one, which makes his temper tantrums look all the worse and pointless. And a good 4 days doesn't make up for 5+ years of nastiness.
Here's the bottom line. Harry's charm offensive is unlikely to succeed in the long run. Why? Because people don't forget. A few carefully staged visits won't erase 6 years of bitterness, public attacks, and self-inflicted scandals. Even if Charles and the media tried to polish Harry's image for their own reasons, health, grandchildren, legacy, it doesn't change the fact that trust is broken.
And I totally agree with that, Lauren. I totally agree. It's like, he must think we're so stupid to think that this is anything other than a strategy. A strategy because the money tap has been turned off, because the Spotify deal is gone, because the Netflix deal is gone, because the corporates are not interested, because he has to try and now convince the world that actually The royal family and the British public and the Commonwealth that I spent the past 6 years so desperately slagging off, actually, I really like them. It's not gonna fly.
And also, it was so highly curated, this
Yes.
trip. And I want your viewers to realize that when I worked as a publicist, if I had a client doing an overseas trip for, let's say, 4 days, I was working on that for months and months. And I knew the narrative and the image I wanted to create. And everything from their hair and makeup to every single interview, every single question, wherever they would be photographed, that was all pre-approved and planned, and everything was done with strategy. Now, if I was doing that as someone that was looking after household and tabloid fodder names, you only have to look at this trip to see how long the royal household and Harry's team have been working to really take advantage of the great British public and to try and erase every single thing that's happened. And it was what they tried to create is a bulletproof narrative, because he got off of the plane. He went to the grave of the late Queen. He then went on to Wellchild, where there were sick children and very vulnerable children, and some children that are living with the most horrific illnesses and may not have long. He then goes on to allegedly give 1.1 million, although that's a whole different can of worms. And so all of a sudden, and then he goes on to see his father who has cancer. So all of a sudden, the mainstream media are not doing what their job, or what they're allegedly supposed to do, which is questioning, pushing, investigating. This was a narrative that was highly curated, and they have been working on this for months. And then Harry pops over from, being with Meghan, eating their sprinkle flowers, pulling carrots out their fake allotment, over here to go on some nauseating charm offensive whereby the mainstream media are backed into a corner. And I think because of woke cancel culture, they actually can't, they're like, oh, we can't say this, we can't say that, we can't, question anything. And then that paves the way for what I believe Charles has done and stepped in to say to the mainstream media, this has to change.
Yes.
This is dominating my reign.
And exactly. And he knows that he doesn't have long left of the reign, which is why all of this pressure has been put on. Lauren, where do you stand? Because this is a highly contentious issue, and it's one of those issues actually that certainly divides the outspoken audience. Now, I tend to lean towards transparency, but also respect for people's private health information. However, I do believe when you are dealing with the head of state, it is relevant. How do you feel about the British mainstream media deciding to effectively conspire with Buckingham Palace? That is what they're doing. I know some people will think it's the right thing to do.
William doesn't trust him. The public doesn't trust him. And Meghan remains as divisive as ever. Harry may score some temporary sympathy, but the cracks will always show. At the end of the day, he and Meghan can't help themselves. Their egos, their need for control, and their obsession with image will always sabotage their attempts at rehabilitation. This so-called reconciliation meeting wasn't reconciliation at all. It was a 25-minute performance, carefully curated for optics, designed to help Harry look less like an exile and more like a concerned son. The mainstream media, perhaps nudged by Charles himself, played along, painting the visit as hopeful and heartwarming. But the public isn't buying it. They remember the Oprah interview. They remember Spare. They remember Meghan calling Britain racist and Harry sneering at the press, only to now rely on the same press to restore his image. The sad truth? The only genuinely human part of the story is King Charles's illness, a reminder of mortality, succession, and fractured family ties. Everything else, the PR spin, the choreographed visits, the children as bargaining chips, is pure theatre. And if Harry thinks the British people are too gullible to see through it, he's in for yet another rude awakening.